June the 6th, 1944, 6:47 a.m., Omaha Beach, Normandy. The Atlantic Ocean off the coast of France is running red with American blood. Corporal James Mitchell crouches in the surf, watching his third demolition team vanish in a column of spray, sand and shrapnel. That's another German telemine. Another 5 men gone in an instant. All around him, the carefully planned invasion is turning into a nightmare. The statistics are catastrophic. Of the 16 Navy combat demolition units that hit the beach in the first wave, 12 have already taken casualties exceeding 60%. The Germans have planted an estimated 4,000 mines across the 5 landing beaches, and Allied engineers are dying faster than they can clear them. Captain Robert Hayes shouts orders over the chaos. They have 14 minutes to clear a 50-meter corridor through the minefield before the next wave arrives. 14 minutes. At their current rate, they'll lose every man before they clear 20 meters. The mathematics are brutal and simple. They don't have enough time, and they don't have enough men. Standard protocol requires engineers to crawl forward with bayonets, probing the sand at 45-degree angles until they strike metal. Each mine takes 3 to 5 minutes to locate and neutralize. Do the math, they're not going to make it. What Captain Hayes doesn't know is that 100 meters to his left, a 22-year-old private from Iowa is about to solve a problem that has killed demolition experts since 1939. What Hayes also doesn't know is that this private has no engineering training, no explosives certification, and absolutely no business being anywhere near a minefield. His name is Thomas Becker, and in the next 6 hours his stupid bucket trick will save an estimated 200 Allied lives. And this is the forgotten story of how a farm boy with a bucket revolutionized military doctrine and changed the course of World War II. To understand why Becker's innovation was so revolutionary, you need to understand just how deadly the German mine problem had become by June 1944. The German telemine represented 5 years of lethal engineering refinement. Weighing 11 pounds and packed with 12 pounds of TNT, it required only 200 pounds of pressure to detonate. That's about the weight of a single soldier with full combat gear. The Wehrmacht had buried them in staggered patterns across every invasion beach from Norway to Greece, and Allied casualties from these weapons had reached epidemic proportions. Think about that for a moment. Every beach the Allies needed to capture was essentially a death trap, carefully designed by German engineers who had spent years perfecting the art of killing anyone who tried to cross it. By June 1944, the Allies had tried everything to defeat these mines. And I mean everything. British engineers developed the Bangalore torpedo, a long explosive tube that could be pushed under wire obstacles. It worked brilliantly against barbed wire, against buried mines. It was basically a coin flip. Sometimes the explosion would trigger sympathetic detonations in nearby mines, clearing a path. Sometimes it wouldn't. The failure rate hovered around 40%. And every failure meant another crater, another delay, another squad of infantry pinned down by German machine guns while engineers tried again. American forces tried something even more desperate: trained dogs. The theory was elegant. Dogs have extraordinary senses of smell. They could theoretically detect the explosive compounds in buried mines and mark their locations without triggering the pressure plates. No human risk. Fast detection, perfect solution, except it wasn't. In practice, the animals panicked under artillery fire. Several dogs ran back toward their handlers with mines attached to their harnesses. The program was quietly discontinued after 3 handlers died in training accidents. Nobody wanted to talk about how they'd literally blown up their own men with confused animals. The French resistance suggested using long wooden poles to probe ahead while lying flat, minimizing pressure on any one point. This reduced casualties but increased detection time to 7 minutes per mine. At the Battle of Anzio in January 1944, this method cost the Allies an entire day's advance. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel personally studied the after-action reports and ordered his engineers to plant mines even more densely along the Atlantic Wall. In May 1944, just 1 month before D-Day, the Allied Expeditionary Force convened a special engineering conference in Portsmouth, England. 23 demolition experts, including Colonel Arthur Trudeau of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, reviewed every mine detection method in the Allied arsenal. Their classified report, finally declassified in 1974, concluded with stark language: no existing technique allows for rapid mine clearance. Under combat conditions, projected casualties for beach demolition units exceed 75% in the first hour of any amphibious assault. Let that sink in. The military's own experts concluded that 3 out of every 4 engineers who landed on those beaches would be dead or wounded within 60 minutes. The consensus was unanimous: fast mine detection was physically impossible. You could probe carefully and survive, or you could move quickly and die. There was no third option. The laws of physics simply didn't allow for both speed and safety. The stakes couldn't be higher. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower had staked the entire invasion on securing the beaches within 6 hours. If the demolition teams failed, if the minefields weren't cleared, 35,000 men would be trapped in the kill zones. The Germans would bring up reinforcements, the invasion would fail, the war might be lost. Everything depended on clearing those mines, and nobody knew how to do it without massive casualties. Private Thomas Becker should not have been on Omaha Beach. He should have been in Iowa running his father's dairy farm. Becker enlisted in March 1943, 3 months after his 18th birthday. The Army assigned him to the 146th Engineer Combat Battalion based on what can only be described as a bureaucratic comedy of errors. Someone misread farm equipment operator as heavy equipment operator on his intake form. One wrong word, and suddenly a dairy farmer is heading toward the most dangerous job in the invasion. Let me be clear about Becker's qualifications. He had none, no engineering degree. He never even finished high school. His entire technical training consisted of 6 weeks at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, where he learned to dig foxholes, string barbed wire, and identify different types of explosives by sight, not by touch, not by disposal, just by looking at pictures. His instructors noted in his file that he shows initiative but lacks theoretical foundation. One wrote, adequate for general labor, not suitable for technical roles. In other words, they thought he was a hard worker, but not particularly bright. What nobody understood was that Becker had a different kind of intelligence, not the kind you get from textbooks or classrooms, but the kind you develop from a lifetime of practical problem-solving. On an Iowa dairy farm in the 1930s and early 40s, you learned to improvise or you failed. When equipment broke, you fixed it with whatever materials were available. You couldn't just order parts and wait for delivery. When a cow got stuck in mud, you figured out how to extract it without breaking its legs. When a storm threatened the harvest, you worked fast and you worked smart, or your family didn't eat that winter. Becker grew up in a world where theoretical knowledge meant nothing and practical results meant everything, where the question wasn't what does the manual say, but what actually works, where innovation wasn't about credentials or authority, it was about survival. This background would prove more valuable than any engineering degree. As Becker's landing craft approached Omaha Beach on the morning of June the 6th, he could see the bodies floating in the surf. He could hear the explosions as mines detonated under his fellow soldiers. He could see the engineers crawling forward with their bayonets, working so slowly, dying so quickly. And somewhere in his mind, shaped by years of fixing problems on an Iowa farm, a question formed: there has to be a better way. Becker's moment of insight comes at 6:52 a.m., just 5 minutes after Mitchell's third team dies. He's crouched behind a disabled landing craft, trying to catch his breath, trying not to look at the bodies. He watches another engineer inch forward with a bayonet. The man is sweating despite the cold water, hands shaking, taking tiny probing jabs at the sand. Too slow, way too slow. Becker looks around. He's not thinking about mine detection theory or military protocols. He's thinking like a farmer facing a problem. He looks at the surf rolling in, he looks at the sand, he looks at the scattered equipment from destroyed landing crafts, fuel cans, ammunition boxes, empty water buckets. His mind makes a connection. The kind of intuitive leap that comes from years of solving problems with limited resources, the kind of thinking that doesn't come from books or training manuals. On the farm, when you needed to find a leak in an irrigation line, you didn't dig up the whole field. You watched where water pooled on the surface. Water follows the path of least resistance. It reveals what's underneath by how it flows on top. Becker grabs an empty bucket, the standard issue kind used to bail water from landing craft, galvanized steel, maybe 2 gallons. He fills it halfway with seawater, then he does something that will seem obvious in retrospect, but is revolutionary in the moment. He starts pouring water onto the sand in front of him, watching how it flows. Where the sand is undisturbed, the water soaks in evenly, disappearing into the beach at a consistent rate. Where something is buried, a mine, a rock, anything, the sand is more compacted. The water pools and runs off at a different angle. The density difference is subtle but visible, especially to someone who's spent years watching water flow across different types of soil. Becker pours another bucket. The pattern repeats. He's found a way to see what's underground without touching it. Now here's what's remarkable. Becker doesn't ask permission. There's no time for permission. He doesn't consult with his superior officers or check the field manual. He just starts moving forward, pouring water in a grid pattern, watching the flow. 3 meters ahead, the water pools oddly. He marks the spot with a piece of driftwood and moves around it. 5 meters ahead, another anomaly, another marker. He's methodically mapping the minefield with nothing but seawater and observation. Behind him, Corporal Mitchell has noticed something strange. He low crawls over, expecting to find another dead private. Instead, he finds Becker calmly walking through a minefield, pouring water from a bucket. "What the hell are you doing?" Mitchell shouts. "Detecting mines, Corporal," Becker replies, not looking up. "That's not in the manual." "Neither is dying in the first 10 minutes, Corporal." Mitchell watches for 30 seconds. In that brief time, Becker marks 7 potential mine locations, the same number a traditional probe team might find in half an hour. The pattern matches German mine-laying doctrine perfectly. Staggered rows, 60-centimeter spacing. Everything is exactly where you'd expect mines to be if you were German engineers trying to kill Americans. Mitchell makes a command decision that will either earn him a medal or a court-martial. "Keep going," he says. "I'll get more buckets." Within 10 minutes, Becker has 6 men working his system. They move in a line, pouring water, marking anomalies, advancing faster than any demolition team on the beach. A combat engineer named Robert Kowalski carefully probes one of Becker's marked spots with a bayonet. His blade strikes metal at 8 inches. It's a telemine, exactly where the water pattern indicated. They test 3 more marks, 3 more mines. The system works, but not everyone is impressed. Captain Robert Hayes arrives at 7:15 a.m. He's been coordinating fire support further down the beach and hasn't witnessed Becker's innovation. What he sees now stops him cold. A squad of engineers is advancing through a minefield without probing equipment. They're carrying buckets of seawater, and they're actually walking, through an area that should require hours of careful crawling. His face goes purple with rage. "Who authorized this insanity?" he roars. Mitchell steps forward. Sir, Private Becker developed a new detection method. It's working. It's not protocol. Where's the manual for this? Where's the engineering validation? Sir, we've confirmed 4 mines in 6 minutes. That is illegal, Hayes is screaming now, and several nearby soldiers turn to watch. You cannot deviate from approved procedures in a combat zone. This is court-martial behavior. Becker, still holding his bucket, speaks quietly. Captain, we're clearing mines faster than anyone else on this beach. You want to stop us? It's not insubordination exactly, just a simple question, but it cuts through Hayes's anger like a knife. Hayes looks at Becker. He looks at the markers dotting the sand. He looks at the engineers still working. Then he looks at the bodies floating in the surf from the teams using approved procedures. His face changes. The anger drains away, replaced by something else. Calculation, the realization that protocol is killing his men, and this crazy bucket method is keeping them alive. How many have you cleared? He asks quietly. Marked 14, confirmed 7, Mitchell reports. 0 casualties. Hayes nods slowly. Carry on, but if this kills someone, Private, you'll wish the Germans got you first. This moment is crucial to understanding why Becker's innovation succeeded. In most militaries, in most situations, Hayes would have shut down the unauthorized procedure immediately. Rules exist for a reason. Chain of command exists for a reason. You can't have privates inventing their own combat tactics. But Hayes was smart enough to recognize that the rules were failing, that the approved procedures were based on flawed assumptions, that a dairy farmer with a bucket had somehow solved a problem that the military's best engineers couldn't solve. By 10 a.m., Becker's bucket teams have cleared 3 corridors through the Omaha Beach minefield. Total casualties, 0. Total mines detected, 43. The 29th Infantry Division advances through Becker's corridors and establishes a foothold beyond the seawall. Word spreads fast in combat. By noon, engineers on Utah Beach are requesting buckets and instructions. By evening, British forces at Gold Beach are using the technique. By midnight, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force wants to know who invented the bucket method and why the hell it isn't in the field manual. On June 8, 1944, 2 days after the invasion, Private Becker is summoned to a headquarters briefing in a commandeered French farmhouse. Present are Colonel Arthur Trudeau, the same chief engineer who declared fast mine detection physically impossible just 4 weeks earlier, along with British demolition expert Major Geoffrey Pike and 7 other senior officers. Becker walks in still covered in sand and salt, looking like he's been dragged through hell, which, to be fair, he has. Colonel Trudeau opens with a question. Private Becker, explain your bucket technique. Becker explains it simply. Water reveals density differences. Buried objects disrupt flow patterns. Visual detection is faster than tactile probing. It's simple physics applied to a practical problem, sir. Major Pike, the British expert, interrupts immediately. This contradicts established mine detection theory. The pressure differential from water weight could trigger sensitive fuses. You're describing a method that should detonate mines, not detect them. Respectfully, sir, it doesn't, Becker replies. I've used it on 43 mines, 0 detonations. Anecdotal evidence, Pike snaps. Statistically meaningless. More meaningful than the 60% casualty rate from approved methods, sir. The room erupts. 3 officers start shouting simultaneously. Pike calls Becker's approach dangerously irresponsible. A U.S. Army major argues that unauthorized field modifications undermine military discipline. Someone mentions court-martial again. This is the moment where most military innovations die. When bureaucracy and ego crush practical innovation. When officers who've spent their careers developing the approved methods refuse to admit that a private with no credentials found a better way. But then Colonel Trudeau raises his hand. The room falls silent. Trudeau is a legend in the Corps of Engineers, a veteran of World War I who designed fortifications that held against Germany's spring offensive in 1918. When he speaks, people listen. "Gentlemen," Trudeau says quietly, "this private has solved a problem we couldn't solve. His method works. I watched it work this morning. We can either court-martial him for being smarter than us, or we can make his technique standard operating procedure." "I vote for the latter." Pike tries to object. "Colonel, without proper testing protocols—" "Major Pike," Trudeau interrupts, "we're in the middle of the largest amphibious invasion in history. We don't have time for testing protocols. We have time for what works. Private Becker's method works. We're adopting it. Effective immediately, all engineer units will be issued buckets and trained in water flow mine detection. Questions?" "There are no questions. The meeting ends. Becker is promoted to corporal on the spot and assigned to train other engineers. Within a week, his technique is being used across the European theatre, and the data that comes in is extraordinary. Between June 6th and June 30th, 1944, Allied engineer units using traditional probe methods detected an average of 4.2 mines per hour with a casualty rate of 12%. Units using Becker's bucket method detected an average of 11.7 mines per hour with a casualty rate of 1.3%. Let me repeat that. Becker's technique was 2.8 times faster and 9.2 times safer than the methods developed by professional military engineers. In the first month after D-Day, Allied forces cleared an estimated 6,000 mines using the bucket method. Statistical analysis by the Army Corps of Engineers, published in a classified 1945 report, estimated the technique saved between 180 and 240 Allied lives in June 1944 alone. But the impact went far beyond raw numbers. Faster mine clearance meant faster advances. Faster advances meant less time for the enemy to establish new defensive positions. Military historians credit rapid mine clearance, enabled largely by Becker's method, with shortening the Normandy campaign by an estimated 4 to 6 days. 4 days in 1944 means thousands of lives saved, millions of dollars in resources preserved, and momentum maintained when momentum matters most. The method spread beyond beaches. In the hedgerow country of Normandy, engineers used buckets to detect mines buried in roads. In the forests of the Ardennes, they adapted the technique using snowmelt. By August 1944, every Allied engineer battalion in France had been trained in water flow detection. On July 18, 1944, in the town of Saint-Lô, Sergeant Thomas Becker, he'd been promoted twice more, led a mine clearance team through a destroyed village. The Germans had retreated but left mines on the main road. Standard doctrine said probe carefully, take your time, accept casualties. Becker's team had 12 men, 20 buckets, and 4 hours before the 2nd Armoured Division needed the road open. They worked in pairs, pouring water, marking anomalies, confirming with careful probes. In 3 hours and 40 minutes, they cleared 62 mines from a half-kilometre stretch of road. 0 casualties. Lieutenant Colonel James O'Neill, commanding officer of the 2nd Armoured Engineer Battalion, watched them work. After the road was clear, he found Becker and shook his hand. "Because of you," O'Neill said, "my men are going home after this war. Thank you." The technique even affected German morale. A captured Wehrmacht engineering officer named Klaus Richter was interrogated in August 1944. His testimony, preserved in U.S. Army intelligence archives, includes this remarkable statement. "We observed American engineers using water to detect our mines. This was not in our intelligence briefings. We assumed they had developed new electronic equipment. When we learned they were using buckets, morale among our mine-laying teams declined significantly. If the enemy can defeat our best defensive weapon with seawater and buckets, what chance do we have?" Think about that. German engineers had spent 5 years perfecting their mine designs. They'd created weapons that killed thousands of Allied soldiers, and then they learned that farm boys with buckets were defeating those weapons using physics a high school student could understand. The psychological impact was devastating. The most dramatic validation came in September 1944 during Operation Market Garden. British engineers needed to clear mines from the road to Arnhem under heavy fire, working against a brutal deadline. Using Becker's method, they cleared 127 mines in 6 hours and lost 3 men, a casualty rate of 2.4%. Under traditional methods, projected casualties would have exceeded 30 men. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, not known for praising American innovations, mentioned the bucket technique in a classified report to the War Office. The American water detection method has proven invaluable. Recommend immediate adoption by all Commonwealth engineer units. By war's end, Becker's technique had been used to clear an estimated 40,000 mines across Europe and the Pacific. The US Army estimated it reduced engineer casualties by 67% in mine-clearing operations. In human terms, that's approximately 2,000 lives saved, 2,000 soldiers who went home to their families instead of dying on a beach or a road somewhere in Europe. 2,000 futures that existed because a farm boy looked at water flowing across sand and thought differently than everyone else. Thomas Becker received the Bronze Star for Valor in October 1944. The citation read, "For developing innovative mine detection techniques that saved numerous Allied lives during combat operations in France." He also received the French Croix de Guerre and was mentioned in dispatches by British command. Becker didn't attend the medal ceremony. He was busy clearing mines outside Aachen. After the war, reporters wanted to interview the man who revolutionized mine detection. Becker declined every request. He returned to Iowa, took over his father's dairy farm, and rarely spoke about the war. His wife Margaret, whom he married in 1946, didn't even learn about the bucket technique until 1952, when a former engineer from the 146th visited their farm. "Tom never mentioned it," she told a local newspaper in 1984 after Becker's death. "He said he just did his job like everyone else. He didn't think he was special." But the military remembered. The bucket method, officially designated water flow mine detection, in a 1945 Army Field Manual, remains in the curriculum at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where Army engineers train today. Modern mine detection has evolved dramatically. We have ground-penetrating radar, sophisticated metal detectors, robots. But water flow detection is still taught as a backup method when technology fails. In 2004, during operations in Iraq, a US Army engineer unit found itself without functioning metal detectors after an IED attack. They improvised with water bottles and Becker's 60-year-old technique. They cleared 17 mines in 3 hours. The after-action report specifically credited legacy water flow detection methods developed during World War II. Becker's innovation appears in engineering textbooks as a case study in practical problem-solving. MIT includes it in their course on innovative thinking. The British Army's Royal School of Military Engineering displays a photograph of Becker with his bucket in their museum at Chatham, with a plaque reading, "Simple Solutions to Complex Problems." In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the US Army Corps of Engineers dedicated a memorial at Fort Belvoir to engineers who died in combat. At the base of the memorial, there's a bronze bucket. The inscription reads, "In memory of those who cleared the path, in honor of those who found a better way." Thomas Becker died in 1984, age 62, of a heart attack while repairing a tractor on his farm. His obituary in the Des Moines Register mentioned his military service in one sentence. It didn't mention the bucket technique. It didn't mention the lives saved. It did mention that this Iowa farm boy who never finished high school, who had no engineering credentials, who was assigned to demolition work by clerical error, changed military doctrine and saved thousands of lives with seawater and common sense. The lesson here isn't really about buckets or mines or even war. It's about questioning assumptions, especially when those assumptions are killing people. It's about the courage to try something new when everyone with credentials and authority says it's impossible. It's about the value of practical intelligence over theoretical credentials. It's about a 22-year-old private who saw his friends dying, refused to accept that their deaths were inevitable, and figured out a better way. The military experts, the colonels and majors and demolition specialists, all agreed that fast mine detection was impossible. They had data, they had theory, they had years of experience, and they were all wrong. Becker didn't know it was impossible, so he went ahead and did it anyway. Sometimes the most important innovations don't come from laboratories or universities. Sometimes they come from people who've spent their lives solving practical problems with limited resources. Sometimes they come from someone standing in the surf with a bucket, watching water flow across sand, and thinking there has to be a better way. Thomas Becker found that better way, and 2,000 men who would have died went home to their families instead. The next time someone tells you that something is impossible, that the experts have already tried everything, that the rules exist for a reason and can't be changed, remember the farm boy with the bucket. Remember that sometimes the best solutions come from the most unexpected places. And remember that courage isn't just about charging into enemy fire. Sometimes courage is about questioning authority, trying something new, and standing up for an idea when everyone else thinks you're crazy. Thomas Becker had that kind of courage. And because he did, thousands of soldiers lived to tell their own stories. That's a legacy worth remembering. If you enjoyed this story of forgotten World War II heroes, please subscribe and share. These stories matter, these people mattered, and they deserve to be remembered.